Mayor Brankman won't be here tonight, so I'm going to go ahead and take over. So Mark, if you could go ahead and give us a couple introductions.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'd like to introduce our new interim Community Development Director, Jennifer Henninger. I know that a few have met her already. Jennifer's in the back. Take it away.
Hi.
This is her first day, day one.
See if she's back tomorrow.
Here's the key to the executive bathroom.
I'd also like to point out the great shirt that our Public Works Director is wearing. Nicely done.
Too close to the engineering side.
So,
Cool. All right. Also, like I said, all the council's here except for Mayor Brinkman. And Mark Vernicki, Chair of the Planning Commission, if you could introduce your folks.
Okay, I'm not good with names, so okay. Well, we have Robin, and I never could pronounce your last name.
Yeah, I can't either.
You can't either. Robin X, okay. We have Jason Reynolds, and we have Dan, representing what, northwest area of Littleton. We have Craig Coronado, former chair, now back on Planning Commission. This is Dr. Bruce Stallman here. Pro Tem, Mark Radnicki. Who did I leave out? Is that all? John's not here. And Dave Bolt's not here. Okay. David's out of town. Sherry's not here. And Sherry's not here.
3 of the 9. That's good. Good turn. So on our agenda, we're going to, a couple things, 3 items on our agenda tonight. We have the Envision Littleton as first item. The second item we have is the site development plan information or regulations. I think that will be by our city attorney. And then after that, we have the exciting topic of Mineral Avenue and Santa Fe concepts. I think that was a good one I'm looking forward to. So anyway, if you could take it away.
okay, thank you. And by the way, it's the Plan Commission, I'm sure you got the word, but just want to reinforce this. Plan Commission is welcome to the entire meeting here. We've got 3 pretty good topics and confident Planning Commission plan. Very interesting.
And board interviews are coming up.
3 nights of fun.
So I'm going to introduce Kathleen Osher. She's our project manager for Envision Littleton. She has several guests to introduce. We have a lot of staff too here present. This is obviously one of our big milestones here for our Envision Littleton process. So with that, Kathleen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council, members of Planning Commission. As you know, and a familiar face, Gary Mitchell joins us this evening from Candid Keys Collaborative. They helped usher us through the unifying vision and guiding principles. Gary will maintain being part of the project as well as being joined by Meredith Dang on the Candid Keys team. And then I have a new face to introduce, although not a new face to the city of Littleton. Been working with us on the Santa Fe and Mineral Intersection study. So Keith Borsheim with HDR. And so Keith will join us on the project management team with HDR doing both the process management, the public engagement, as well as the transportation master plan. So Keith's going to bring us a wealth of experience. I think he has a really strong multimodal approach to how he views transportation. I think will benefit a lot from his collective thinking and obviously the work that he's done already in the city. So
thanks.
Welcome. Would you like to add anything?
No. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Kathleen, what's Keith's last name again? Borsheim?
Like
I should have said X.
Like Florsheim, the shoes, but with a B. Yep.
Oh, okay. It's a better way to, yeah. Okay, so we're going to dig in tonight. The intention of this evening is really to get the project kicked off. As you know, in 2018, we spent our time on a unifying vision and set of guiding principles. We'll do a very quick and brief overview of that work, and then that tees us up to do both a comprehensive plan and transportation master plan in 2019. We'll run you through some of the shared values that we unearthed as part of the process in 2018, how those relate to our work this year, review that timeline for the project, and then at the end have sort of a set of expectations and I hope a discussion about your roles and anything that you'd like to add to those expectations or protocols as we work as a joint leadership team over the coming year. So, digging in. It's been a month about, or a little more than a month since we adopted the unifying vision and guiding principles. Kudos to all of you for the work that was accomplished through that process. This is just a really brief overview of the vision. I think one of the most important pieces of that document was really digging in on the small town feel, really understanding how that relates specifically to the vision for Littleton as well as where we see ourselves headed. As you know, I think we had a stellar set of input from the community. I think we had a great process. I think we were very transparent in how we proceeded with the community conversation. So in many ways, that lays an incredible foundation for us as we begin this work in 2019. It sets us in a very different position with an aggressive timeline, but we're in a very different position than we would be had we not done such in-depth work and really had a very organically driven and organically from the community process, because I think that gives us some very strong standing in terms of what we heard and how we can apply that. So to kick off this evening, I think, Gary, are we calling on Meredith for this part? So we're going to have Meredith come and join us and talk a little bit about the shared values that we learned throughout the process of the last year. How will those become very useful in terms of how we think about planning, when we have to get to decision-making points, and when there may be trade-offs? How can we use these as tools to help aid us in our decisions?
So where we are in the process currently, we're looking at existing conditions. So what is Littleton like today in all the different topic areas that the comprehensive plan will cover? But we're doing this building off of the adopted vision plan. So we're looking at all this data through the lens of the vision, the shared values, and the guiding principles. So really trying to connect those two things together. So we're not going through the whole existing conditions tonight, but we wanted to give you a snapshot of how we're starting to link those two pieces together from the vision and the comprehensive plan. So Kathleen said I had to make it fun, so we're going to
bring on the fun.
Do this a little interactive. I saw in your packets that they printed the slides with the answers, so don't peek.
We've all memorized them, right?
The idea is that it would be blank like this and you wouldn't see. So just go with it.
Erase all that you know.
And this is a data point that you all may already be familiar with in your work on the Planning Commission and on the City Council, but others in the community may not be aware of. So what do you guys think the median age in Littleton is? You can just call it out.
24.
56. 56? Well, we're going to...
Oh, the great unveil. Oh, wait, it's in your packet.
Matt, you're almost right.
I swear to God,
42 is pretty much right on the money. This is pulling from the census, and we've also started to look at those trends over time. So like many communities across the nation, Littleton that median age has been getting higher over the decades, and we've also been comparing that to the Denver metro area as a whole. So Littleton, it does have a higher median age than the Denver metro area overall.
This is the oldest median age community I've worked with in recent years.
I still want to say that has to be tied to the date that was done. There are a hell of a lot of little boogers in my area. New ones.
So we need a new bar, Little Boogers?
The census does put out a new estimated population annually. So the most recent one was 2017. It doesn't come out right on January 1, but we do pull the most recent data that we can. So again, but back to those shared values and guiding principles. So as you all recall, one of the shared values that came out of the process was being inclusive. And this included both age, race, income, and faith diversity. So again, thinking about if we know we have this different range of ages in the city, how do we be inclusive and meet the needs, the differing needs for housing, transportation, schools, parks, all different age groups use these things in different ways. And then this comes up as well in the guiding principle of connected. And we looked at Connected in a lot of different ways, and one of those was being an inclusive community that has opportunities for really all different sorts of residents to thrive. Okay, now, again, we didn't see that answer sheet, right?
Wipe your minds.
So, what percent of homes that were sold in Littleton in 2016, so this is a couple years old, could the average Denver metro worker, which in 2016 would have earned $60,215, so what percent of homes could that average worker afford to buy in Littleton?
50.
You guys.
What? How did you know that?
It's a mortgage break.
Well, my guess is that number may surprise some folks in the community, may not have come up with that quite as readily as you did. The other interesting fact that went along with this was that of those homes, almost all of them were attached homes. So a lot of us think of that single family detached home, really the homes that the average worker could afford, and they could only afford 15% of them, and almost all of those were attached homes. And by that we mean more like your townhouse or your duplex or your condo. So this goes back to that same shared value, again, of being inclusive. You'll see the next bullet under the age, race, income, and faith diversity was housing options. This was something that came through very clearly in the engagement work. Concerns about being able to be inclusive given the skyrocketing housing rates that we've seen, not only in Littleton, but in the Denver metro area as well. And then again, back to that same guiding principle of inclusive and neighborly, and again, looking at those through the lens of housing. Seniors have different housing needs than families that might be looking for more that larger single family home. Okay, this is the last one, and you know where I'm going with this. So now we're looking at what percent of Littleton residents that are employed, so not if you're retired or too young to work or any of the different other reasons you might not be employed. So what percent of employed Littleton residents work somewhere else? They don't work in Littleton.
88.
Oh, man, you guys are so good. Yes. So
Someone did their homework.
yeah. What this graphic is showing us, the green in arrow is those who don't live in Littleton, but they work in Littleton. So you'll see that is the biggest arrow. You see that in the big green circle. So that's almost 28,000 people a day are coming into your city to work here. You have a small percent, about 12% of people, about 2,500 people who live and work in Littleton. And then you have over 19,000 people who live here, and then every day they go somewhere else to work.
How did you get these numbers? Those seem very crazy and almost exact numbers.
This is
I mean, our population is only 46,000. That includes kids and everything, so all our kids are working too?
No, the 27,000 is people that don't live here.
Oh, gotcha, okay.
Yeah, they don't live here, but they work here.
Gotcha.
So they're not included in the population number. So the people that live here and are working would be your 19,000 plus 2,500. So right around 21,500.
Right.
You probably can't answer this, but does it include, how do you find out sole proprietors or people that are consulting that, don't bother to tell the city they're living and working here or working here?
So this is pulled from the census. There's a subset of census data called the LEHD, Longitudinal Employment Household Data. Did I get the acronym right?
We need an engineer for acronyms.
They have a whole categorization of occupations. One of those would be if you're self-employed or work out of your home. So they might report on the census and not tell the city, and that would still be picked up. But like anything that's self-reported, you got to have that caveat. But that is the source of the information. So how this fits into our vision work is thinking about the ways that people are moving around. So if we have 28,000 people that are getting to Littleton every day, how are they getting here? well, we see that in the road system, the light rail, and the transit system, and what the impacts on that are, not only for the people that are coming in, but for everyone else trying to go the other way and get to their job. So we can't just think about how people that live in Littleton are getting around, but also those that are coming here to work every day. We're also contributing to the economy here in Littleton. And then again, we had a guiding principle, that connected guiding principle again, that deals with accessibility, that physical mobility, the highways, the arterials, the transit services. I don't know how many people are coming here by bike, but we can find that out as well. But also the things like the trails and the greenway. So this is just a quick snapshot of, we're going to be looking at a whole bunch of data, but the intent is to have that lens, back to our camera analogy, of the vision and the guiding principles as our base.
And I was going to mention too that back on the small town graphic, all those items that make Littleton a small town feel place, one of them was being an active community during the day. So that graphic that was up there with the numbers coming in and out, when we work with the bedroom community, it's out. And the place, we turn off the lights until everybody gets back in the evening. And so this is, but it also relates to this being a hub community for education, government, so many things, medical. So, so that's the types of things we look for too, is how your city is different from suburbs, from other types of cities. So that's how we're looking at numbers too.
Yeah, and we've talked about, both at the stage of adoption and even before that in our discussions about just how important these guiding principles were for decision-making moving forward. Even our opportunity as a city to begin to incorporate them into the way that we do business on a daily basis and really adhere ourselves to that community gift that we were presented as part of the process in 2018. So I think that becomes really important when we start to think about the inputs that go in, and again, using that sort of filtration analogy that we began to illustrate as that camera, but really being able to dump those inputs in and look at the things that we'd like on the other end for the outputs, right? So that we have an opportunity to be very values-based in our decision-making, that we have the opportunity to be priority-driven, that we will have a comprehensive plan update, a transportation master plan, and as well as other ongoing city efforts that we can begin to use this and that sense of filtration. So these are all sort of items for review for this evening. The last item for review is really those 5 phases for a vision. We introduced this to you in November, just to kind of guide you through how this will work with both the comprehensive plan update and the creation of a first ever transportation master plan. So we are squarely in phase 1. When we come to you in March, which will be our next joint leadership meeting, we'll be concluding that phase 1 and really having the discussion relative to phase 2 and moving on into those scenario plans. So it'll be a very, it is an aggressive timeline, but I think what we've done on the front end is really create a process that becomes very clear. One of the documents that was in your council packet was the community engagement plan. So I just want to highlight a couple of things in that plan, and they're mostly on page 4 and 5. I think what I would emphasize is that in creating this plan for 2019, what we did was try and build on that community engagement plan that we had for the vision and guiding principles. Really emphasize what we learned through the process in terms of having the conversation with the community, but also be very clear in terms of setting the expectation for roles and responsibilities. And so we've tried to illustrate that on page 4, delve into it with way too much text on page 5, but sort of a necessary evil of being able to clearly delineate where the community is involved, where the joint leadership comes into play, project team and technical team, the introduction of a community coordinating council, which will kick off tomorrow evening. I believe Councilwoman Fay is representing City Council, and then Chairman Rudnicki, yes, from the Planning Commission, will be representing the Planning Commission. So you're in very good hands.
Let us know how that works.
I think you're in good hands. So I think that'll be an opportunity for them to really hear from the larger group, bring that collective thinking back to each of the decisions you make along the way. So we also took the opportunity to kind of detail what a comprehensive plan and transportation master plan. I think those are, new exercises for the city. We really haven't been through an update in quite some time. For a transportation master plan, this will be our first ever. So I would love to answer any questions that you have on that. I think part of the community engagement plan includes, a lot of the tried and true things that we found through the vision and guiding principles. It's really important for us to be out in the community. So I think that is first and foremost where we will look to engage members of the community. So we were incredibly successful by being at a series of events all through the summer. We have that same incredible opportunity this summer to really have that conversation. We have a great team in partnering with HDR and the public engagement side. The other thing will be really focusing on any and all educational opportunities. Part of this process will include a 4-part speaker series, which we look forward to sharing some more information in the next week. We wanted to get through this kickoff and get through the community coordinating committee, and then we'll kind of unveil the plans for that speaker series. That'll start in February. It'll be a 4-part series to sort of coincide with each of the milestones of those phases, but also really looking at opportunities for our dedicated website, our social media, making sure that we keep this as robust and public a process as we possibly can. I hope that we have built that trust. At least that's been my experience so far with the vision and guiding principles. I think we've built a lot of relationships along the way, so we'll look forward to really leveraging a lot of those and continuing to build those relationships for the city as part of this process.
Kathy, I have a question for you. On the phases right there, you had said we're deep into phase 1, and in March you're going to come back with, it sounded like you said, with the beginning of phase 2?
Yeah, so phase 1 is really that existing city's data collection. And I would, if you're interested, I could ask both of them.
Well, my question is, does that mean our schedule's sliding? Because phase 2, it appears to be starting in January.
End of phase 2.
End of phase 2. Yeah. So the phase 2 will really be our opportunity to look at a combination of both things. So the shared values, the guiding principles, overlay all of the information about what we know with the existing city. So it'll be that real hard data crunching and analysis. And then what joint leadership will be tasked with, which is this graphic here, is the decision will be what will be included in the plan and be addressed. If there's anything that cannot be addressed, what's our plan to address that in the near term?
Okay, I guess I just want to be reassured that we are on schedule. Because
we are absolutely on schedule, and we're driving them crazy, right?
Okay. Thank you.
But that phase 2 is really the decision of where the plan goes, what will be in, what will be out if we have to make those choices. We'll rely very heavily on the expertise of our 2 teams, but bring all of that data and information and analysis to you to make that call at our March meeting. And then we'll start on the path of doing a lot of that scenario planning, both on the land use and transportation side. So, yeah.
The community engagement, is that going to start at phase 2 or phase 3?
So right now, we are doing, the community engagement that we're doing is much more related to the vision and guiding principles. We're taking every opportunity to be out in the community and kind of share the fact that we've adopted it. So, for example, on Friday, I was at the South Metro Chamber Economic Forecast event. They were kind enough to let us set up a table and share the story of our vision and guiding principles. So we're doing a lot of events like that through phase 1 and 2. Much like this evening's presentation with the existing conditions for the city, we think there's a huge opportunity to engage our public in almost a game show format, right? Like, what is the median age of Littleton? And really uncover a lot of that data in that fashion. So we'll be doing that. We've talked with our communications team here at the city to start looking at how we can do that with social media, maybe how we can do that with our website, driving people through there, but then also including that in any opportunities for presentations. So that'll be that phase 1, 2 style of engagement. And then phase 3, because we'll be in this scenario planning, we'll actually be able to take things out in terms of activities and sort of have that conversation with the community of like, if this, then this happens, and sort of push and pull on those levers and kind of take some of those scenarios out. So that phase 3 really coincides with almost the identical 15 weeks that we spent. You know, we did like 110 events in 15 weeks because of how many events are happening here in the city. So we can take advantage of that schedule again. So it gets really robust in the sort of planning exercises. And then 4, of course, we're doing a lot of the analysis of what we can afford. What are the strategies to sort of get closer to implementation? So I think, again, that presents some good opportunities to talk with the community. And then phase 5 is adoption, so that resides mostly here.
When you're collecting this data and overview, what do we get? Do we get an executive summary and 120 pages of raw data? I mean, or is it, what do we get?
I know we're just started talking about that. I know, do you want to talk a little bit about our conversation on
Sure.
Thursday?
So as we go through the process, we'll be collecting reams of data, which obviously would be probably inappropriate for this setting. So what we're trying to do is turn that into bite-sized, or not bite-sized, but more digestible pieces of data that you can review, provide us feedback on. So, you know, at the end of this, or as we go through this process and at the end of each phase, you'll be getting essentially a chapter of what the final report would be. And you can stay up to date with where we are, so you'll have like an existing city. Here's the existing city report. And then as we go into phase 2, here, you know, here's what will be included in the final plan. As we go into phase 3, we'll be engaging you on, you know, what your goals and objectives would be for your city and how those play into scenarios. So, you know, it's going to be a variety of different formats. But, you know, typically you'll get a packet of information and have this opportunity to provide feedback. But it won't be, hopefully it won't be an overwhelming amount of information.
8 a.m. left-hand turns on Mineral, Santa Fe.
Right. So
when do we get that, roughly?
Yeah, so March.
It'll be in March before we get that packet. Will that be, that's our first look-see at anything, really, is in early March? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, and we've kind of had the conversation about would we produce a typical existing conditions report, you know, to the tune of 50 to 75 pages, and we've kind of gone the route of, with both consultant teams, to produce that in a data book format. We're still talking about what the final tool, like how would that be most useful to us as a city moving forward? Could we create it almost in a interactive online tool that you could turn layers on and off, and you could kind of see how some of those things match up? So we're set to meet tomorrow as a project management team and trying to figure out what's the best way that we can not only produce it in the sense of giving you all of this data for decision making, but also make it an ongoing useful tool for us here at the city.
The danger is always you wait till all the, you know, wait, and then throw it all at us at once, and it's a fait accompli, rather than continually giving us information as we go along, so that we have more time to digest it and to respond to it and feel like we're part of the process versus just getting a lump, here it is, you know, every 4 months or something like that. Right. More often the better, really.
Okay.
So break it up a little bit.
Okay.
Any other questions? So you're going to try to break it up a little bit then? Is that what I just heard you commit to?
Yeah, can we take a look at that tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's totally doable.
Okay.
I don't, for us, the more input that we can get from this body as we go through, the more successful we're going to be as a group.
That's the point. That's half the point.
I think, you know, we're on the same page. It's just a matter of finding that balance between too many touch points where we're, you know,
you don't have to write the whole
all
book.
of your time versus...
Give us a chapter.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So I think it's an iterative process we'll work through.
Yeah. And I think what we tried to outline were really those decision-making points I mean, one of the things about this timeline requires us to sort of move from each phase, make those decisions, and then squarely be present in the next phase. And it will be an iterative process, so that'll be super important for us to kind of remember as we go through this process, is that once we've reached the end of phase 1, then we're on to phase 2, and so on and so on and so on. So I appreciate that input, that you'd like to see more and be able to digest that throughout each of those phases. This body is set to meet as joint leadership 7 times, with the adoption of both plans scheduled for October 15th. Again, those decisions, they'll be at each of those phase points and each of the milestones for the project. We're really asking you to bring a ton of your experience, both as elected and appointed officials here in the city, to make these decisions. But I would welcome any thoughts that you have in terms of expectations about how you'd like to work together, any protocols that you'd like to set, because tonight the nature of our presentation is really to have that conversation with you about we are kicking off this project officially with you this evening, and so if there are things that you would like to set in terms of expectations, we'd love to have that input.
Can you explain this desire now? I knew it was an important question.
It's just meant to be fun, right? It is one of those aspects of being out in the community, is that you do make friends with fun things. And so he is meant to be a smiling Envision dude.
A little mascot? Are we going to order a life-size...
Oh, that's a good idea.
That someone can wear
around? Are you volunteering
I
to
will
wear the mascot? Can you get a suit made in that color?
What was that?
Can you get a suit made in that color?
Sure.
You ought to see the suits.
I was going to
Well, I just remember the one from Christmas.
Probably has one.
I have no shame.
Yeah, so,
Any other dates for the meetings other than the March 12th?
yes, it is part of the official calendar, but I'm happy to share those with the group too. So our next one is March 12th, and then,
Thereafter, yeah.
yeah. Okay, great.
Hey.
Yeah, so I'm trying to digest all this, and I have a very slow digestive system. But part of me, based on what you're saying, is we have a hell of a lot of people who come to this city who don't live in this city. I mean, they come, they shop, they do whatever they want to do, but they don't live here. So are we doing this for everybody who happens to spend some time in Littleton, or a lot of time in Littleton, or the residents? I mean, is this the vision of the residents? Or do people maybe who own stores, a lot of them who don't live here? Or somebody else? I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. I mean, if that makes sense. Because we could have, in what we've got so far, quite different envisioning for what Littleton should be, other than what it is. I mean, all the people that talk to me, and that's self-selected people, so I mean, they select whether they want to say something. And I do go to the chamber meetings. Most of the people at the chamber, a lot of them are not Littleton people, so I'm not exactly sure how much we should be hearing from them about what we should be or what we want to be.
Kathy, maybe you can give us a balance of the information kind of related to what she's asking.
Yeah, and I might call on Gary, who might call on Meredith. No. But I mean, it was actually a topic that we talked about in the beginning. Was it best when we were doing unifying vision and guiding principles to be sort of agnostic on where you live? Like, if you identify with and love Littleton, we'd love to get your input. Of course, if that isn't in balance, that doesn't do us a lot of good as using it for a foundation for something like a comprehensive plan or a transportation master plan. But I think if you would remember in the vision document itself, the map of even, and this is just one tool, right? Like, so this is just one tool with the survey. The vast majority of people are living within the boundaries of the city. So that input in terms of the vision, but maybe both of you might talk a little bit about how comprehensive plans and transportation master plans take into account the regional impacts as opposed to just the residents that are here.
Yeah, the vision process, that phase, and now the comprehensive plan, transportation plan, it's about your community, your residents, the people that are here every day. But then, yeah, we're going to show some numbers that show that other people are interacting with your city, visit as shoppers, as tourists, Hudson Gardens, things like that.
Just for a second, a lot of the people who are here, the residents, don't work here, including legislators, right? They go downtown. I mean, state legislators go downtown, right? Potentially some could go to Washington, but so it's anyway. So I wanted to.
Where I was going is that I think the engagement in this phase will be much more about your community, but then there's all the organizations that aren't just Littleton, whether it's a regional chamber. You know, there's different organizations that do spread and cover a greater area. So we're going to hear those voices, but I think more of the engagement, and correct me if I'm wrong, is more focused internally at this point versus what we did last year. Because last year we were really looking for resident impressions and feelings about their community, but also to compare that against what other people thought of Littleton. So we were able to track both of those.
For the sake of getting through all the material we have tonight, could we focus this question and then get a specific answer?
Sure, I thought he was answering it myself.
I don't know what Peggy's question is.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Peggy, I think Peggy's question was that where are you getting your information and what is our vision? Is it just for citizens of Littleton, or is it also including folks that come to Littleton that don't live in Littleton? And I think that sounds to me what you were addressing.
And then could you state in one sentence what your answer to that is?
One sentence.
Or two.
Be a run-on.
I'm confused about what was just said.
Can you give me 2 sentences?
I already granted you 2 sentences.
Vision for Littleton is a vision of the residents plus others, how they perceive it.
Okay, thank you.
One
That's
sentence.
the one.
We've seen economic reports before where we need outsiders for our tax base. It was been proven that Littleton citizens themselves don't generate enough tax base. So we better pay attention to the outsiders, create places for them to want to come to shop, to enjoy recreation, etc. We need them. So we need to reach out to them to continue to attract them to the city.
I think Gary still has a dangling sentence out there.
He had his 2. You started with 3. I interrupted.
Well, he only did 1 so far.
Comprehensive plan is going to focus on the land within the city, the parks, the infrastructure, the housing. So it's going to be much more internally focused. Probably the transportation plan is the part that's most about interactions and flow of people and traffic across your city lines. The comprehensive plan is really more inward focused, but then, as pointed out, it's getting to be a long sentence.
It's not a sentence anymore. It's a paragraph.
There's no amount of commas.
Economics is also where we cross jurisdictions.
Mark, we're going to have a new transportation board, is that correct? Mm-hmm. And what role are they going to play in this?
They're actually, they're going to participate in our CCC as well when we get them up. Council has interviews. So they'll be part of that oversight group that participates with staff. I think, too, the Transportation Mobility Board is going to have a longer-term involvement here. So definitely in the Transportation Master Plan, they're also going to be helping council decide what are the priorities for transportation and make recommendations. So it's beyond just the TMP and the comp plan. There is this involvement over time of trying to test what are the improvements we're going to make from a capital investment perspective. Thank you.
Transportation plan, since we're talking about that. In the engagement plan that was included in the packet, there's a bunch of bullets. It's on page 6 where you talk about transportation factors or issues that are important to the city of Littleton. So I had a question about a couple of them, kind of in the middle.
Okay.
starting with managing transportation demand and reducing single occupancy vehicle use, and also the first and last mile transit connections. So, I mean, I know that that's important to some people, but I know it's not important to a lot of other people. Are we going to actually ask our community, do you want us to be doing these things, instead of telling them we're going to be doing these things?
So, a couple of things. Kathleen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe these were generated as part of, or result of the outreach that's already been conducted.
Right, and so this came from your team that I think pulled it from the scope.
Yes. And so, I think we've already heard some of this from the community through our process last year. I do think it's appropriate to ask again as we move through this process. I don't think that it's necessarily our job to kind of dictate to the public what we think is best for the city of Littleton. However, I do think it is all our job to, as consultants and as planning commission and the council, to try to represent what we've heard from the city and what we know as professionals may help the city achieve its vision. So,
Conversation with the community about these.
Yes, and have that conversation that these may be appropriate measures to take to address transportation issues here, which we know that we have. So, yes, it will be a conversation, not a...
More specifically on that, because I wondered about that too. Did these ideas come from the Envision interviews this summer, from people in the community, or did they come from another source?
I think it's a mix, yes. So, yes, we've definitely heard some of this. I wouldn't say that this is a comprehensive list of what we heard.
No, what I meant was the concept of reducing single occupancy vehicle use. I have a hard time picturing very many people in Littleton, especially the quadrant that I live in, saying that.
Okay.
Just because there's no other way to get around.
Right, and so
and
part of our...
Just to clarify too, these are really intended as sort of what would be a transportation master plan, what would be a comprehensive plan, just to kind of make some of that distinguishing, not necessarily this is Littleton's transportation master plan, right? Because that is undefined until we have that conversation with the community and until you make those decisions, right? And so this is meant a little bit bigger picture. So if there's anything that you feel might be confusing as part of that definition or sort of foundation setting, we certainly wouldn't want people to think that this is what's been adopted or this is the plan, right? Like this is going to be community driven, just like we were last year.
So this is almost for conversation's sake.
Right, and sort of definition, right? Because we've never done one. Like what would even be in there? With a comprehensive plan update, we haven't really done a full update to the comprehensive plan in quite a few years. So 1981 was our last full update. There have been some smaller updates along the way. But what would even be included in that? What is a comprehensive plan? How would that even work for us as a city? So these were intended to be definitions. So if there's anything that sort of stops people in their tracks or gets them to dig in their heels, like that's not the intention of this. And so if there's anything that strikes you that way, we'd love that feedback.
Before we get to Carol, does anybody else have a question? Because we're going to do one more question and then we're going to wrap her up. Carol?
I'm going to, this is in a fun way, get on Peggy's turf about words. I didn't know what the word nexus means, and I have a master's degree in English. That suggests to me that maybe we should use other words than words like nexus. Maybe the word link, something that's ordinary words that people use commonly.
All right. Good catch.
How was that, Peggy?
You're super.
Do you want to close up?
Yeah. Look at that. A thank you slide. It's our next meeting date. And again, that goal will be really to kind of get your input and provide some direction for where the plans are going. If you have any questions along the way, I'm happy to answer those. You remember the easy email address, kosher. So I'm happy to answer any of those questions.
So I just want to comment. I think when we had the last huge comprehensive plan, somebody said somewhere along the line, we don't want to have one of these things that happens once every jillion years. We want to be having a living document that we are revisiting. So the notion, and that's what I think we have been doing very well, which means that you work on the elbow right now, but then maybe you work on the wrist later, but it's all part of the body, and that's not exactly right, because if you're a chiropractor, you want to get them all working at the same time. But the idea was to try to see where we needed to fine-tune or reach out, gather more, so that we're a living, breathing update, ongoing. Is that?
Yeah. If I may, yeah, I think that's exactly on target. And I think that probably in our March discussion here with this leadership group, you're going to start to see where that's going to play out over time. Absolutely, this is not just a one and done kind of plan. The intent of this is to be able to update this on a regular schedule so it does stay current, so it stays relevant. And I think it's been the challenge for our community for the last several years is that we really haven't had something in place to do that. So we're trying to set the foundation here so that we can update this easily, or certainly much easier than we're doing now, I should say. The transportation piece is probably an easy example. Things change over time with transportation, so that's why having a travel demand model, something we can update and help predict future land use decisions, is very helpful and something we need to be aware of.
And what's happening in communities that are more outlying is part of what is having such a big bearing on us. So.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, Kathleen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take 2 minutes to turn over here and move into the next one. So, Stephen, we get you?
Yes, Michael and I.
What kind of time limit do we want to do on Stephen?
I'm going to be a lot quicker than this.
We're going to do it by the number of words, Steve.
That's right.
And I promise not to use the word nexus.
Except with the word rational.
When you're ready, Stephen. Thank you, guys.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Stephen, are you ready?
Yes, we are.
All right, we're going to move into the proposed site development plan regulations and the city attorney.
And with me is Michael Sutherland, planning manager from the Community Development Department. And just at the outset, why are we here? One of the things that the Tipton study talked about was improving our processes. And in fact, council took a big step towards that recently with the enactment of the subdivision code. That was a major improvement to how we process subdivisions. The document before you tonight is another proposal on improving our processes and giving us the tools to do things better. So, why site development plans? The site development plan code that we currently have, much of it dates back more than 25 years. It has not really been modified at all. And the code is frankly exactly contrary to what the Tipton study alluded to. It has requirements such as we go through a full review of a concept site development plan, and then we repeat the same thing on a final site development plan. Highly unusual process that you don't find anywhere else. And so as a result, working with the planning staff, we looked at how could we make this process better. And at that point, I'm going to turn it back over to Mike, and then I'll jump in at the end.
And at this point, for our viewing, Folks, Mike, if you could just say who you are one more time and your position.
Yes, my name is Mike Sutherland. I'm the planning manager for Littleton. And good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and council members and planning commissioners. So I'll just briefly walk you through the amendment as we have it drafted. The initial question is does the city of Littleton, the council and the planning commission want to support amending the development site development plan code?
We can answer that right now, Council. Save ourselves a half hour.
We're done, we're finished. But we probably ought to tell you what we're asking you to do.
Little details. So the proposed amendment has a few new definitions related to site development plans. And it updates the procedures, namely in regard to processing these site development plans, and most importantly, in regard to appeals of site development plans. So the new definitions include minor site development plans and major site development plans. Right now, all we have is a general category called site development plan. This would divide it somewhat similar to the way plats are divided. Major site development plan is the way to start. Any site development plan that's industrial development, again, industrial development is going to be included as one of the new definitions, or a term for industrial, and also commercial would be included. Those are related to these two types of site development plans. But a major site development plan would be any industrial development with more than 10,000 square feet of building space. Any multifamily development in any zoning district with more than 8 units. All commercial development in any zone with more than 30,000 square feet. So these are the larger projects that we can see in a year's time. And then any development on any parcel whatsoever that's in excess of 10 acres. And then minor site development plans would be pretty much everything else. Anything that's in smaller categories than that. The processing pieces.
So could you back up?
Yes, certainly.
I had a bunch of issues on a lot of things, but just as one of my questions, the major site development changes from more than 4 units, I think, to 8. That seems, I think the current one is 4. And this is going to 8. And that 4 seems like a lot of units to me. So to go to say now we've got to crank it up to 8 before it becomes major?
So right now, any multi-family development requires a site development plan. But a multi-family development could be 10 units, 30 units, 500 units possibly. It could be just a site development plan.
I wish I'd still had the page I was just flipping through.
18?
I'm not sure, Carol.
15? 15 is where we have the definition of site development plan.
And the reason that 8 units is picked is that many times you may have a quadplex, 4 units that's built on a platted lot, and they're built for renting. And what we wanted to deal with is you're building an apartment complex that has significant impacts. You're building a fourplex that doesn't have the same level of impacts. Now, you still need a site plan in both cases, but when we get to the appeals process for a major site plan is different than the appeals process for a minor. So it isn't that you're exempt from site planning, it's that if you're building more than just 8 units, you are automatically going to fall into the major site plan category, and that's going to invoke this much more stringent appeals process.
So just to clarify Councilmember Cole's question, right now we don't have major or minor site development plans, we just have generic site development plans.
That's correct.
So this is just outlining a definition for a difference between major and minor. So does that help, Peggy?
Well, it may. I wish I could find where I just closed down and now I can't get back to, so.
The other thing is we don't have a structured appeal process for these major projects. So you could have a major project and it's treated exactly the same way right now as a very minor project for site planning purposes. And we would suggest that there's some very, very good policy reasons to you why you should consider that that maybe isn't appropriate.
Planning Commission, you have any questions at this point?
Well, the rules for minor versus major, I assume they're different in that time it takes to get through the process. A minor, less information, less consultants required, et cetera.
Absolutely. You have a minor site plan. Let's talk about something that a 10-unit apartment building. That is the parking is much less complicated. The accesses are much less complicated. The traffic's much less complicated. It may be suitable for using existing utilities. Where if we're building a 600-unit apartment building, we are getting into a lot of much more complicated things. It may require additional utilities. The sewer line may not have adequate capacity, so there may have to be additions to that. Water lines may not have adequate capacity.
And when you say less complicated, you mean relatively?
Yes.
Yeah. It's relative to the bigger guys.
It's simply, there's a much different level of complexity. Now, one of the things our current site plan code doesn't allow us to do, it doesn't really have clear standards on what we're supposed to review. So, of course, again, that creates projects where we go back and forth. One of the things that this code, and we looked at a number of Colorado cities, Fort Collins, Greeley, Arvada, Lakewood. One of the things that this code does is it gives us now clear standards. So not only are we going to have more tools in the toolbox, so to speak, we're going to have a much more detailed structure on how to use them.
When you bring this, I'm assuming you'll bring this back to us in a proposed
Yeah,
ordinance.
let's hope.
But can you give us those comparisons to the other municipalities to see how their definitions for major and minor?
One of the things we did is some municipalities go even further down. Others, anywhere, some municipalities might use 10,000 square feet of commercial space. Others use as high as 50.
Yeah,
one of the reasons we thought 50 was perhaps inappropriate would be that some large grocery stores, a Safeway, it generally is not going to be 50,000 square feet, and yet it could have an impact. So what we looked at a number of square footages and said, for Littleton, what would be appropriate, what would have a major impact? In this community, a Safeway Plaza, and I'm just using Safeway because it happens to be a name we're all familiar with, a Safeway Plaza could have a major impact. That might not be true in Aurora. So do they have different standards? Yes, but we looked sort of at different communities, and the 30,000 was what, from a planning standpoint, we thought was appropriate for Littleton in terms of the level of impact that a project might have. Again, some communities don't include multifamily. I don't think that there's any question some of the most recent multifamily projects in this community have had some significant impacts. And so in this community, we felt in Littleton that looking at multifamily and being a bit more restrictive and defining those as major makes sense.
I can proceed with the presentation. Oh, yes.
So back, now that I found this piece, so the piece about the number of attached units going from 4 to 8. So potentially somebody could have a property or more than one property, adjacent properties, and rather than having to go through go through this review, if they wanted to avoid certain things, we increase the number to 8, they could have 2 4-unit places right next to each other, essentially, or a 4-unit and a 6-unit, or to 6 units or whatever. I still like the 4.
They still have to go through a site plan process, council member. The only difference would be is whether it's a major versus a minor, but they would still have to do that.
I just still
You have
like
clarifying?
So what to a follow-up to that is, can we look at the process of what is the process going to be under a minor SDP versus a major SDP, so we can see someone that's going through a 4-plex or a 6-plex, what do they have to go through versus someone that's doing an 8-plex, so we can see the different process.
Side-by-side comparison would be interesting.
Yes, and as we go through the presentation, the most significant difference between a major and minor site development plan is the appeals process. Both minor site development plan and a major site development plan are administrative. There's similar requirements for each as far as what information is provided and how complete they are. But when you get to the appeals process, that's where the most significant difference lies, in my opinion, in this proposed legislation. So, okay, thank you. So, as far as processing goes, as Steve mentioned, there's some clarification for the process for all site development plans. The pre-application process is defined and is very similar to what we're doing now, but it will be moved into the code so that somebody who is applying for one of these can understand that more clearly. The application requirements are more clearly defined for both of these, major and minor. Approval procedures are more well defined, and also there's approval criteria that are probably expanded on, as Steve said, more tools in the toolbox. And then post-approval, when we record things and finish up that process. The major difference, I think, I shouldn't say major when we're talking about major and minor site development plans. Most significant difference. The attorney knows how to speak. The most significant difference is the appeals process. Minor site development plans, these smaller plans, apartments with 8 or fewer units, could only be appealed by let's say staff denies it. Then it could be appealed by the applicant. And when the applicant appeals it, it would go to the planning commission for a final decision. For the major site development plans, this is different. These are the more impactful projects, if that's a word. And they could be, if staff approves it, it could be appealed by any property owner within 300 feet of the development. And if staff denies it, it could be appealed by the applicant. It's very unlikely that if staff denied a major site development plan, that a property owner might appeal it within a 300-foot range. That would be really up to the applicant. It's very unlikely that if staff approved a major site development plan, that the applicant would appeal the approval. Very unlikely. But a neighbor could.
Bruce is trying to chime in there, I know.
I was just going to ask, if Planning Commission denies an applicant's appeal, is there further redress to City Council?
They would have the right to go into district court under Rule 106.
Okay.
But essentially the Commission Act, action is final. And this is the biggest change right now in Littleton. All of these site plans are treated like minor site plans. There is no ability for neighbors or impacted property owners to participate. There's a well-known case involving a development across the street from the courthouse, which there was an appeal of a site plan, and only the applicant had rights to appeal, not any property owners. That's an unusual situation in most cities across the country, not just here in Colorado. On major site plans, there's a zone of interested parties, and that zone usually is a number of feet, might be 300 in some cities, might be 100 in others, might be 500 in others. There's no magic number. And property owners within that zone also have a right to appeal. And it's a recognition that the major site plans can have a significant impact on adjacent property owners. And so really this is bringing the Littleton Code up to what other codes across this state, and in fact across the country, you would see for site development plans. The other thing that I think is really important is you look at our code currently. One of the steps our code requires is that first you have to do a submission of concept plans, and they go through a full review, but they don't go anywhere. You then have to do a brand new submission of a final plan, and they get reviewed a second time, and you go basically do a completely duplicate review. And this really gets rid of that structure. You submit a site development plan like a plat, it goes through the review, it goes through comments, it gets sent back to the applicant. Once it's done, then it's eligible for approval. And that is the kind of process you would see anywhere else.
Mike, I have my full confidence you're going to get this completed yet.
Yes.
You're optimistic, Jerry?
Trying to be. Peggy has a question, then we'll...
Yeah, so since you allude to a famous recent structure, that property could have had 3 8-unit or 4 8-unit, maybe 5 or 6 8-unit things built on it, but I'll go with just a couple. Could have had some built on the same amount of land, that site, so that they could have built separate things and loaded up a place that somebody was still be objecting to, who couldn't, whatever. So I'm
Councilmember, that would not be able to happen, because what would happen is if they tried to take multiple lots and build an apartment complex, we would not approve the plan.
No, you misunderstood.
Yeah.
They take several lots because they combined a few properties. Yes. So they could still have separate lots, build separate things, and have a mess, at least what some people would consider something not very desirable, by just divvying it up as opposed to having something larger that maybe is more desirable. But anyway, I'm sorry.
I think this process is to get the major site development, so there is to help rectify the situation where a neighbor or a resident could not appeal that. And so that's what I think it's moving in that direction, to address that situation.
My interpretation of that would be that if somebody came in, if there's one site development plan that is for one property, 2 properties, or 3 properties, that's all combined into one site development plan, and it has more than 8 units. If it's one 8-unit building or 2.
No, so I didn't say what. So you might as well respond to what I think I was trying to ask. They could separately do this, then do that, then the other, and wind up with the same thing, with a series of...
Essentially 3 projects, you're saying.
And follow zoning codes, so zoning regulations, heights, setbacks.
Yep,
that's possible. And then you buy another piece right next door, do the same thing, buy another piece, and you follow the zoning rules.
Usually if somebody wanted to do something like that, they're unlikely to go through several site development plans, although you are correct, that's possible.
Karina, I know, again, go ahead.
I think the question that, or what we'd like to get, what I'd also like to get an understanding of is, what are the loopholes that we need to think about?
Sure.
And, how can someone work around this to still create a high level of potential density, but they've kind of cut it up in such a way. And again, the likelihood may be low for all of those reasons, but we just want to have visibility to what are some of those loopholes that can happen. And then if you can give us some indication of likelihood in the sense of, well, if that happens, first they have to go through this, they would have to subdivide, and we've just put into the code that subdividing and making smaller lots, it's limited. There's a zoning that stops what the minimum lot size is. So help us to piece this into what other parts of the code protect us in other ways.
Sounds good. We can do that.
Thank you for that idea.
Yeah.
Good. That addresses
And
Peggy's question.
I appreciate what you're saying there, Corinne. This one, I think, combines some lots by purchasing and then amalgamating them or whatever.
All on one.
Yeah. And so it's interesting.
So maybe let me clarify then that point. If there's one parcel of land and there are 3 separate buildings, and the sum of those 3 separate buildings is greater than 8 units, even though they're separate buildings, would they be considered a major?
That would be considered a major.
Yeah, absolutely, that would be a major.
But if you have separate lots and you just buy
Right.
the lots and do whatever
the separate is what
to
I
try
asked.
to avoid
Right.
this
So the
kind
separate, there might be other code that helps protect or minimize that impact.
So there may be something else we want to be looking at to try to protect neighborhoods, to make them the family-friendly neighborhood, to keep them the family-friendly neighborhoods or whatever.
Good points.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Oh, staff recommendations. We're near the end. We would recommend that City Council direct staff to bring forth an ordinance amending the site development plan regulations and provide us direction, which I think we've well embarked on that road as it is. So I've ruined Steve's very short presentation.
Obviously, this will go to the commission because this is part of Title 10, the zoning code. So this will also be coming to the commission for its own review.
Karina.
I'm going to say this because maybe some of the planning board, Mark and Bruce, might remember this. I heard you say, Steve, that you're bringing in some process into the code of how to do this. And I believe at one point when we were working on code updates in the land use table and all that work with Clarion, one of the things we were trying to accomplish is how do you simplify this? So the code is what you can do, and it's really, simple. Here's what you can do. Then how you do it is somewhere else, so you're not mixing all of this terminology together. But I think I just heard you say you're putting process back into the code.
Council member, the answer is yes and no. Most of the reason I say that
Such a lawyer.
As a contract professor of mine once said, it depends. The answer is we have a set of operating standards that governs most of our processes. One of the problems we have with this code is that there's absolutely no structure on the processes at all. It tells us, a good example is planned development zones. Planned development zones technically don't have to have a site plan. The code says that the final development plan constitutes essentially the site plan, even though the final development plan has no standards for what's supposed to be in it. That's an example where we are putting some process back in because it's completely missing, but the idea isn't that we're going to have all the processes here. The processes, in terms of how we do an application, in terms of how we manage this all the way through the process, will be in the operating standards, which is exactly what the Clarion assessment recommended. It's just, this is what I call gap filler. We're filling in some significant gaps that are missing. And a good example is we have a project right now in Littleton, right up the street from here, involving a hotel. And quite honestly, again, our current site plan code really doesn't give us the kind of specifics that you would have in other cities that allow us to manage that project as good as we could. Are we managing it? Yes, we are. But if we had a better site plan code, could we do it better? Yes, we can.
Patrick.
Kind of brought that up a little bit, Steve. So what about the existing plans that we have in process right now? And are there plans that can maybe come back to the city, to the planning commission, or to be reviewed under the new ordinance, assuming it gets passed?
What would happen is the existing site plans would be subject to the current code. If council, planning commission and council were to adopt this code, those plans that have already been approved, we would apply the existing code to. If they were in the process, usually if they have basically, if they're final review, we're going to apply the existing code. If they're early in the process, we're going to then say no, we're going to redline them based on the new code. And that really is one of those operating things that the department handles internally, and we don't specify in the code.
And you spring it on the developers and architects.
Oh, not.
Thank you very much.
We never spring anything on the developer.
Talking of operating standards, one thing I didn't see in the code was a specification about how nearby residents who have the right to appeal a major site plan would be notified in the event that one is approved. Is that something that's covered sort of in the operating standards, more so than in the code?
So we have several ways to notify residents of what's going on in the area. But as you noted, there's site development plans, both types are administrative. So that's an interesting aspect we can take a look at. Right now, it's handled through the development activity list. All applications are posted as soon as they come in. But that doesn't necessarily mean that a resident would have a great chance to know. You know, we've all talked to residents who, hey, what's going on? You know, as it starts being built, that's when they start getting concerned. And that's understandable. So that's one aspect we can look at.
Now, one other aspect of this is that on major site plans, under this proposed code, they would require at least one or more neighborhood meetings. So where the neighborhood would get notified through the neighborhood meeting process. But we could certainly look at incorporating a public notice process or a posting process.
As we get close to giving our direction, Mark, does this go to planning commission first, the ordinance?
Correct.
Okay. So the first reading will be to planning commission.
Well, it's a little bit different than that. We don't have our reading per se before the planning commission, but we do take the detail of this to the planning commission first for their review and comment back to council.
So it goes back to us.
Yeah.
Bruce?
I was just going to ask, do you envision this being part of or applied with the P4 process at all, the way?
In many cities, the P4 process is also used for site plans. We're coming to council with a recommendation to extend the P4 to all zoning cases. Now, at some point after we've done that, we may recommend to council, like many other cities, that you also allow it to be used for site plans. Right now, we have not done that.
So council, at this point, do we want to give direction which way? So Kyle?
Love to see proposals.
Absolutely, yep.
Nikki?
Something.
Sabrina? Yes. Yes. All right, cool. So that's your direction.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks.
We did that 45 minutes ago.
Yes, I did.
You could have saved so much time.
I tried, you know. I need 3 other people to go, yeah.
I can tell you there's no nexus between site plans and plans.
Adding another slide. All right, so we're going to take a 5-minute break. While Keith gets set up, he said. Okay, that sounds good.
Service redo.
The roll here. Mark, if you'll kick her off.
Mark and Mini Mark. Yeah, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and again, our snappy dresser, Public Works dresser, director, Commissioner.
You guys are going bowling afterwards, right?
And well done. So I want to introduce Keith here. We've got some concepts here that we've been working on as staff here for the last several months, and I think Keith wants to give an update here about why we're looking at this and the timing of that. So, Keith?
Thanks, Keith Reister, Public Works Director. So tonight what we wanted to do is I'll try and get you out here by 9:30. I'm going to take the Steve Kemp approach.
Hey, the chief's not here.
I was done in 25 minutes.
Got a target now. So what we wanted to do is touch base with council tonight and kind of bring you up to speed on some discussions, some technical work we've been doing, also some bigger picture timelines that sort of are surrounding all of this out there. So we're going to talk about Mineral and Santa Fe, small intersection here in town. We, don't get a lot of discussion about that. So why we're here tonight is to bring you up to date, and why is it timely? Part of the reason, there's several reasons why this is a timely discussion and why we need some feedback from you all tonight. First and foremost, we've got some development encroaching down there, as you've seen that with the Evergreen development, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. Additionally, we're in the midst of the tip cycle and how that's going to affect us or may not affect us, and what that potentially looks like and the impacts on us. So what, in the bigger picture, we're saying is that, okay, we have a problem out there. There's a whole bunch of traffic going through there. It's our highest traffic accident location. Obviously, if you've ever driven through there in the middle of the afternoon or the middle of the morning, you know what we're talking about. And what we're seeing there is not only is it a problem now, it's an intersection that's outgrown its lifespan a long time ago. But on top of that, there's development to the south in Sterling Ranch that's going to start to push more volume into that intersection no matter what we do. And Evergreen has proposed a development in the southwest corner that when you reviewed it here in the P4 discussion, that's an additional large number of trips as well. So what we're talking about is the reality of getting to a final solution is a long ways out. It's basically longer than you would all be term limited off council before we put a shovel in the ground, to put it in perspective timeline-wise. So we need to talk about interim solutions, and also, because interim solutions are important, how that impacts the other potential users and property owners in the area. So HDR was our consulting team on this. They did some public outreach in the area, went out there, and not only did they do that and do some engagement with alternatives, but we did a lot of modeling as a result to see what options really look like. And so when you do that, some things rise to the top. So let's talk about the timeline here. Is that we started with the current state of where we are. We just went through the alternatives analysis. The way the tip cycle is working, so just to bring everybody up to speed, every 4 years we go through a process within our planning region, which is Dr. Cog, to identify a list of projects that are prioritized in order to get funding through the federal money that comes through CDOT. That's the way the process works. Every MPO, our MPO is Dr. Cog, Metropolitan Planning Organization, goes through this process every 4 years. Every other one in the state's going through it right now. Front Range, North Front Range, Pueblo, Colorado Springs, and so forth. So Dr. Cog has taken a different approach this year that we talked about, where they've kind of divided the buckets out, and they have one bucket which is really focused on regional projects. They're of high regional significance, and then basically each county is a sub-region, and then there's going to be prioritization and project lists within that. When you build a tip list, Transportation Improvement Plan tip list, you generally put double the amount of money you have in the tip list. So let's say you have $100 million of potential projects. You're going to create a list of $200 million in case for some reason money falls from the sky. And I can say from personal experience why this is important. When the stimulus package came out, when we were in that time period, I had a project when I was in another jurisdiction that was the first project funded by stimulus in the state. And that was because we had done all that work ahead of time, where it was situated in the tip and all the partners that were already at the table. So that's why doing the work in advance is critical to where we need to go. Additionally, having the local match money on the table, or overmatch, is pretty important because that is a leverage point as you go through the process. So we've talked up to this time about the PEL, and so out of Arapahoe County, our regional project, one of our regional projects that was submitted is the PEL, the Planning and Environmental Linkages Study for Santa Fe, basically from 470 to Alameda. With all of those jurisdictions, that's about a $3 million project. At this point in time, that's in the top list, the potential funding list. That still has to go through Dr. Cog, through the Dr. Cog board, and all of that. And we still don't know in that cycle, we don't know at this point if it's going to come in 2020 or 2023. We won't know that for another couple of months because it's not like all 4 years of money are in year one. They got to be spread out over 4 years. So that's why we don't know exactly yet. We'll have a better idea of that probably in the next couple of months as we get through the next stage of the process. But at the current time, it's above the cut line. But the cut line is close to us, and there's other projects below the cut line which are scored almost the same. So that we're still in a position where this could move up or down. The one advantage we have is the other projects below us are construction versus ours are planning, and there's a set aside for planning. So I think we're in a pretty good position, but we're just going to have to kind of wait and see at this point. So that's where we are. So the next step in that, we're going to spend some time with you all tonight, and then you get your own box. And then we're going to, as part of our Arapahoe County subregion, we are going to be going through the process of submitting projects and then ranking those projects and then forwarding that to the bigger Dr. Cog process and put everything in a big bin and shake it out eventually. See what those lists look like. So we are in that process now. From a staff perspective, the three items that we are considering submitting for sub-regional projects. Normally, if a transportation master plan was done, this would be an easy process because they would be listed in there. But in this case, the three that we're considering are the interim solution that we're going to review tonight, corridor technical study for Broadway, because it's also identified as a Tier 1 bus rapid transit route within the RTD planning cycle that's occurring right now. And in order to maximize those opportunities, we need to take a look at land uses, access, all of those things. So that's the second project. And the third project is the final build out for Federal and Bowles, leveraging the work that we're doing now to create the ultimate solution at that intersection, leverage what we've done. One of the advantages of that project is the work we're doing now can be considered local match when we go to do the bigger project. So that's kind of where we are at this point in time. So I think everybody knows where this intersection is. If you don't, feel free to take a tour tomorrow at 4:55. Great time to do it because you'll have plenty of time to observe everything while you're there. So just to kind of put this in context, obviously US 85 runs north and south and minerals east and west. There are a lot of constraining factors here. not just volume, but proximity to everything. You've got the river nearby, you have grade changes, we have stormwater issues. You have basically 2 railroad lines butted up against the east side. They're not really prone to moving. So that also impacts what you can do from a grade perspective. There's also the impacts as you go south with all the stuff related to 470. So there's a whole bunch of factors in here. Plus, you have pinch points on the east and west legs as well. As you go west from the intersection, the closer you get to the river, the more challenges you have. Likewise, going in the other direction. So what we asked our consulting team to do with staff is to really create 2 swim lanes. One for short-term alternatives and one for long-term alternatives. And what we did in that process was go through a number, sort them out, eventually get to some higher priorities that look feasible, and then have 2 that are going to rise to the top in each of those categories. And that's what I'm going to share with you tonight. In the short-term column, you can see there we have a continuous flow intersection and also a quadrant road concept. You can see the price tags down there below. I'll show those to all you in a minute in a bigger picture. And then on the right-hand side, we've got the long-term solutions. The 2 probable solutions that can fit in there are a SPUI and a diamond interchange, and those alternatives are both close to $90 million. So that's a pretty significant number. Just as a side note, $90 million, a 20% local match is pretty significant.
How much did Bellevue cost at the time it was built?
I do not know that off the top of my head, but I can find out, and we'll check. So, short-term at-grade, these are at-grade solutions. What this does is it presents options without having to build a whole bunch of vertical structures, because once you start playing with vertical structures, your costs go up with the columns you're putting in the ground, simply put. So this one right here is a continuous flow intersection. It's a little bit, if you've never seen one of these in action, it's a little bit hard to understand. But when you get on the ground, it's not hard to understand at all. I have been fortunate to build one of these before. I actually have a quick visualization here of what a CFI looks like. This is from a concept drawing. I'm not going to have the guys talk to you, but basically what happens in a CFI is on 2 legs, you have another intersection that's short of the main intersection. And you stop the left-hand turning movements at those signals back here. And then what you do is when the traffic like this goes green, the left-hand turning movements can turn away from it because you lose cycle time with left-hand turning movements. And so what happens is that gives you the chance to gain a whole bunch of time. From an operational perspective, you get a whole bunch of volume out of this as well compared to what you do. Additionally, CFIs tend to fit into a smaller footprint than a traditional intersection, requiring less right-of-way. You can see how the arrows work here. So you can see those arrows moving those movements to the other side while the other ones go green. When I built one of these before, I can tell you one thing on the ground. There's one thing American drivers understand, and that's a traffic signal. Okay? Now, we become dumb to traffic signals because anywhere in an urban area, you go to a 4-way stop at 455 and it turns into chaos. You go do that in Eaton, there's not a problem because they're used to driving through those all the time. So what happens here is everybody's so used to having a signal tell them what to do. So in a CFI, the signals are directing everybody, and drivers immediately figure it out. I can tell you, though, here's a visualization. So you stop the traffic at this light. It's like this. They go green, and they move to the other side, and the traffic's going to come over on this side. So they move freely going this way, and the traffic going northbound's in this other lane right here. There are 3 of these right now in Colorado. The most urban one is in Loveland at this point in time. So conceptually, that's what a CFI does. So let me go back to where we're going here. I got to put my glasses on so I can get back to PowerPoint here. So that's one of the intersections. This is about a $12 million fix. What you see in this particular intersection is we can wedge it into the right-of-way that's there with just a little bit more right-of-way from the RTD property. This would be a significant challenge in terms of construction because you're operating within the existing right-of-way. You still got 90,000 vehicles a day going through there. So you do have some, you would certainly have some challenges there. This particular alignment's not super pedestrian friendly, but there's really not a lot of pedestrians wandering through this intersection at this point in time, and probably not in the future anytime soon. The other option is the quadrant road. So a quadrant, in this particular case, the quad is in the southwest corner and in the northwest corner. And in this particular concept, just like the CFI, in both cases, both of these models, you gain about 60% more capacity than you have today in the intersection. So you would see immediate change. And so in this particular case, you can see the alignment here. It moves traffic away from the intersection and around it in a different way, adding additional capacity. This is an example of the southwest corner. This is the concept. Let me come back to that slide. So in this particular case, this is what the quad road might potentially look like in the southwest corner. Now, you saw Evergreen's development recently, and I'll refer to that in a minute. So this concept brings that traffic around. I'm going to go backwards here. This is what the concept would look like on the northwest quadrant. If you're not sure how this is looking, that's Santa Fe going along this way in the picture right there. And it would go through the RTD lot. When we touch base with RTD, they're sympathetic to the option. Their only comment was, please don't take away any parking, which this would impact about 30 spaces. But once we're getting to this point and other developments going on, we're going to have to talk about different parking solutions with RTD at this location no matter what. So that's what this concept looks like. And then this is how the continuous flow intersection would fit in the same footprint. As you can see, the requirements for right-of-way are significantly less than what you do. Now, when we start talking about ultimate solutions, the quad roads provide relief during ultimate construction. They give you an option to route traffic around during ultimate construction, so that's another factor to consider. If you take the north and south quad roads together, they're about $18 million, and the CFI is about 12. And so there was a question today about why that looks like that. So what I underlaid here with our staff is what has been submitted to this point by Evergreen. Okay? This is the document we have in hand as staff. Now the alignment of that road is, the curvature that's laid on there is based solely upon how you get the traffic through there the best. It doesn't necessarily line up with, making some jogs in it, doing some other things. So that's how that looks right there. Now, obviously, this impacts that development. Obviously, there's right-of-way considerations. Obviously, there's going to be impacts based on what happens in the southern parcel and access points. And one thing that I'd like to point out, specifically related to this development, is there's a plat from 1982. There is no identified access point on Santa Fe. The only way access gets onto Santa Fe from this development is with the city's approval, because the city is the only organization that can request access onto CDOT's right-of-way. So whatever solution we come to, the city has to be in agreement with where that alignment is. And we would obviously try to work with the developer to come up with a solution that works for them, regardless of whether a quad road goes in there or not. But we are the agency that has to submit to CDOT for approval. And we've already talked. They've been involved in this process with us for over a year, so they've seen everything that's on this particular discussion. So those are the interim solutions. What I'm going to ask you for here at the end is, if you nod your head one way or the other, to help me understand maybe if there's a preferred direction from this high-level concept that we as a staff should be thinking about, that's where we want to go. This helps us because if we submit the interim solution as a potential a sub-regional project, helping us identify which of these two helps us in that process to sell our case.
Keith, if I can pause 1 second.
Mm-hmm. Maybe just a question, Keith, back to you. You might talk a little bit about the ultimate answer here for interchange of Spooey or Diamond.
So
How that affects the two different alternatives and how much can you actually save? You know, how much do you save one versus the other?
So CFI, you basically aren't going to save anything. And in the quad road, you'll save some, plus it'll add help during the actual construction of the ultimate interchanges. Sometimes we'll have a discussion that says, well, we're building a throwaway. A solution that is going, we will not be building the interchange ultimate solution for at least a decade. There's not $90 million sitting around in a pot, because what has to go through is not only do we have to go through the PEL, we're going to have to go through the NEPA process to get approval, ultimate design and letting the job. So if we all squish that all into one tip cycle, which probably won't happen, the earliest you're going to get some money is probably somewhere in the vicinity of 2028. And I think that's being really, really generous to get it there. So conceptually, if something's going to be there more than a decade, it's going to provide relief for the vast volumes we have there today. I don't necessarily consider it that much of a throwaway from an operational standpoint.
Keith, does the first plan, it has the least negative effect on that property right there?
That is correct.
So then what is it called, the first plan again? What's it called?
Continuous flow.
Continuous flow. So is that also the one that would be easiest to deal with in the future?
I mean, what's going to happen, from a future construction standpoint, this is going to be a nightmare to build, regardless. You're going to have to impact, you're going to have some lanes going around to get traffic through there simultaneously. It's going to be a very challenging construction no matter what you do. And that's going to be the very complicated part of the task. So it probably, the CFI would work through part of it. You may go back to a traditional alignment while you're doing part of the construction. That's an option. But the quad road definitely allows you to work within this intersection and just route traffic around on a temporary basis if you need to. So that's kind of the impacts. But since ultimate design in detail is not done with a schedule, it's hard to tell.
Great.
A couple of questions. Just wanted you to give me that time.
We've been waiting.
Yes, we have.
You have, on the quad, you broke out the cost between the northwest and the southwest. Is that because you can do one and not do the other? What was, okay.
You can do one and not the other. The one thing that my staff definitely wants me to point out, specifically Aaron, Aaron sent me an email this afternoon that probably had more words in it than are in all the slides combined. Any good traffic engineer will do, is that whatever solution we put in place here on an interim basis, there's going to be some ripple effects. You're going to push traffic in different directions. It doesn't matter what you do. That's already occurring. So, we're still going to have a shift pattern there because there's pinch points in all directions. So no matter what you do, you're still going to have some shift in there, which is already occurring. So, this may just push some traffic, even though you get the capacity there. You may have some traffic overflow into other areas. So.
Second question. I said a couple. The quadrant intersection, this is a little bit of what I think Jerry was talking about as well. When I look at the quadrant intersection as it wraps around the RTD site, so the north.
Yes, turn your head this way and you'll be north.
Northwest.
Particular
that really limits what that particular area could be. And in a previous mineral framework, mineral plan, that parking lot potentially envisioned a mixed use, say wraparound parking to shops and things like that. And I feel putting this major road in between really creates this box of the only thing that's ever going to go there is parking.
If you look at that, there's really only one additional road versus what's there today. And it's the east-west road between Santa Fe and the existing road that exists. And I understand what you're saying. It isolates a parcel right there. and I understand where you're going with that. RTD is not, I mean, they're not even working on expanding parking there. So it would take some significant work to get that done. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I agree it limits some of the options there. But at the same time, we certainly have some challenges with this intersection, and as a community, we have to balance those.
Keith, maybe I think there's a significant challenge here, obviously, for a council trying to understand kind of the full benefits of either of these options. Would it be appropriate if we took the more expensive option? And I realize the tip is kind of the deadline you're trying to march towards. What if we kind of put a project forward in the tip that looked at the most expensive, but recognizing we still need to do some preliminary engineering work to understand what truly is the best alternative for us to build? And that way we can play out the conversations with RTD, play out the conversations with Evergreen, try to understand with both alternatives really what are kind of the alternatives, and ultimately build some kind of a matrix to help us understand what's the best alternative here. Obviously, it's difficult tonight to try to make that decision.
Yeah, I agree with that. In fact, as part of this TIP sub-regional process, we had to submit forms to both CDOT and RTD a month ago with projects that said, hey, you know, we're looking for concurrence if you're okay with whatever concepts we're putting out there. This is for all projects. And also there's a box that you check that says, are you asking for money? And I checked all those boxes. So RTD and CDOT was not, thinking that wasn't going to happen because we're going to ask for the money. So in this particular case, what we put in that form is interim solution. Here's two alternatives. This is the upper end of that. And obviously, additional engineering is going to have to take place, additional decision making with all the stakeholders, which is us, CDOT, Arapahoe County, RTD, developers, all of those things are players in this, and coming to a final solution would involve all of that partnership to get there.
I'm sorry, maybe one other piece to add here, and I think Keith kind of alluded to this a little bit here. I think there is a sense of urgency, not just at the tip, but we obviously have a development company who's engaged in our process now. And I think this is timely for us to try to work with them to try to find the alternative that helps them somehow manage their project and move forward. And at the same time, take care of an existing problem that we all know is dire. The other thing I think is pretty important to note is that the 78 acres south of Evergreen is now under contract. And so that development company is going to be moving forward with their own project. So to me, that raises the sense of urgency even higher, that somehow we have an ultimate solution that solves the problem here, hopefully, at least 10 years. But I would agree with Keith that the ultimate, pursuit of an interchange is probably 10 years. Don't be discouraged by that. It's okay. I've been through this before. You have to be persistent and you stay on task to get that done. We will get there, but it takes a commitment. And I think Public Works has come up with a pretty interesting concept here for the interim. And I think that we should pursue those kinds of things, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Now, when I look at the continuous, does it really help the east-west traffic that much?
Actually, in my experience, having actually built one of these, it does. And what happens is you gain a whole bunch of time through the intersection by eliminating two legs of left-hand turns. And you gain capacity in either direction as well. So you have a lot more capacity to push traffic through an intersection at the same time. So you get additional help on all the legs in this particular case. I can tell you there are challenges to operate them. They're hard to plow. You have to plow them in the middle of the night, that's all I can tell you. Because it's hard sometimes to run with the light signals with a plow. But you figure those things out. Those things happen. That's what happens when you build everything. It happens. You figure it out when you do it. So.
Pat, you have a question?
The $90 million on the SPUI, is that just Littleton's portion, or would that be the entire amount?
Well, I'll pop through to those slides so we all know what's looking there. It's probably the easiest thing to do. So if I can get going in the right direction here. Obviously, I'm glad I'm not driving through the intersection right now. So the two potential alternatives based on the conditions, the volumes, all of those types of things are a diamond interchange. I didn't put a visualization here because pretty much everybody's driven through a diamond interchange. And then the other configuration is a single point urban interchange. This is what Bellevue is. This would obviously be Bellevue on steroids. It would probably be a simple way to put it. And they fit within the challenges that we have at that site over time. Both fall out about $90 million, and obviously we're not going to pay $90 million. In a situation like this, as Mark said, you go through the process, you seek additional money through the state and federal process, you go through design, you go through environmental analysis, and then for eventual construction. We're still going to be, when I say we are going to be on the hook for local match, that's where you're talking all of the partners in a situation like that. And that's part of the discussion that will come out of the PEL process is between 470 and Alameda, there's a whole bunch of challenges out there and which ones are at the top of that list. And that's where it helps decision making in the future to where those funds should kind of be funneled. So,
what about noise levels? I mean, the southeast corner where there's residential, and you have the wildlife to the west. Which one of these is the least impact on noise?
They're all about the same. I mean, you got...
So they're all noisy?
Yeah, you got 100,000 vehicles going through. There's only so much you can do.
Are we spreading that out somehow?
No. I mean, basically, when you look at all those designs, they're all pretty much... The CFI is pretty much almost in the existing right away. Okay. The quad road puts some more traffic around. There'll be more volume in the northwest corner and in the southwest corner of the quad road. Because it's undefined in the southwest corner at this point in time. I'm not 100% sure. In the northwest corner, yeah, you may have a little more noise going to the residential that's actually in the northwest corner is where that pickup would be, I would expect. So those are the examples, the SPUI and
Craig, you want to chime in?
I just had one observation. I'm not sure that I would downplay the pedestrian bicycle access, especially or even in the interim. I ride my bike down there quite a bit. Usually the destination is the Carson Nature Center, which is right there in the South Platte.
We agree from a staff perspective in that it's part of the east-west corridor study that we're looking at with South Platte Working Group and other partners along the river. Obviously, the existing situation took nothing into consideration. I mean, if you didn't have the pedestrian overpass from the station to the parking, you'd be a dead end.
But, yeah.
I mean, it would be. I'm not sure I can recall ever seeing a cyclist actually go through the intersection itself. If they are, they're very courageous, and they're probably wearing all armor gear when they go through there. So, we absolutely agree with that because one of the challenges we have all the way along Santa Fe, not just in our own jurisdiction, is Santa Fe is. If you go back 50 years, 60 years, planning theory went down the line where you pushed water and riverfronts were immaterial. They were the wastelands. And so as a result, all your industrial ended up there, and you put highways there. The island of Manhattan is a perfect example. It's just a big ring highway. Chicago is the same way. Denver is the same way. That's why we're doing redevelopment like where Elitch's is. And so we have the same problem with Santa Fe when it comes to connectivity across, all the way up and down the corridor. So right now we've got the South Platte Working Group's east-west connectivity study under work, which will help us look at potential solutions to that going forward. So
the other observation I had was that the redevelopment on the southwest corner really provides, I think, a unique opportunity to sort of integrate that quadrant concept into that. The overlay, I think, started to demonstrate.
Yeah, it's actually not a redevelopment; it's a development period. The only development before is farm and wildlife. So, it's more of a greenfield situation, which offers some really positive things. Things that most people probably don't think about. There are some grade changes out there between the two parcels that are going to create some challenges for the development partners out there that are all going to have to be taken into effect, as well as that whole issue with that the integration with South Platte Park. So basically, these are the challenges, both short-term and frankly long-term. Needs for right-of-way, how do you pay for it, bike and pedestrian, construction impacts, all those types of things. So that's what we wanted to share with you. And I'm sorry to say I don't have the $90 million check in hand, but I'll continue to work on that every day. So The reason we wanted to bring you up to speed on this is, obviously, we have some imminent issues that we need to deal with, which are related to development and also the TIP. And so we'd like to get sort of concurrence in a way. Would you like us to chase money for an interim solution? It's the easiest way to put it. And then if you have a preference related to the two options that you just saw in the interim, I mean, we have time to work through that. But understanding that also allows us a better idea to deal with right-of-way issues, help Evergreen through their development process so that they can move forward effectively. And also, one of the things that's important with that is if the quad road is selected, actually, even if the CFI is selected, that impacts where the access points are in Santa Fe south of Mineral. So that is a critical issue related to both parcels and the development of those parcels going forward. So an ability to understand kind of where we're leaning helps us work through that process to, I think one of the most important things for us is to not preclude options as we go forward.
So the bottom line here is the sooner we get a reasonable plan on the table, the higher the probability of being funded at some point.
Yes.
But we've got to have a plan on the table.
Yep, I mean, that's why, from a staff perspective, that's why we just spent tens of thousands of dollars doing this design work so that we had the ability to go chase the money. Because we can't go in there with Keith's napkin drawings because they're not very good. So I can say that for sure.
Is Evergreen up to speed on this quadrant road?
So we've had discussions with them. They've known about this discussion for as long as they've been here. And so you all saw the P4 in here. We haven't really seen a resubmission that's different than that. That's why that's there. But we've certainly been meeting with them and showing them these concepts. I mean, they saw this a few weeks ago before the holidays conceptually. And they got this packet when you did as well. And they've provided some comments back to us. A lot of their comments were very technical in nature, like who's going to put the right-of-way, who's going to pay for it. And those are technical things you work out once you kind of get going in a direction as you go through there. But coming up with where we're going to go is going to help us get through that process and make decisions.
I'll start and say, yeah, I'd like to see this move forward and try to find the short-term alternative. Going with the southwest quad road, is there any leverage to be had with Evergreen?
They're not an annexation. So if they were developing on their own, more than likely a road through there, the spine road, would be 2 lanes. Okay. In order to accommodate this, it would need to be 4 lanes. So the ultimate project would be responsible for the oversizing, which includes the right-of-way, to make that happen. So if this was an annexation, having done some of those, you would be putting a lot of pressure as a council on the developer to contribute a fair amount of money to the solution.
I might say that there's opportunity for both parties to try to work towards some kind of agreement. I would probably coin it that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly beneficial for them if we can deal with the access points quickly, for example. And
it's going to be more of a parkway than I would say a on-ramp to a highway, coming through that neighborhood. So, I mean, I think there'd be a real upside for Evergreen development to really think, okay, we're getting some traffic by, so some good opportunity for commercial visibility.
Yeah, we've talked about, that spine road there. You might be able to have a large roundabout that flows traffic continuously, feeds in their signal. Those kind of things are certainly some of the things we talked about.
Because we're talking about Evergreen and that quadrant, the cost that we have here is just to build that quadrant. Is there potentially an incremental cost associated with acquiring property from Evergreen?
That's kind of included in that number.
Oh, that's already included in that number?
We haven't identified that in detail because we haven't done appraisals, we haven't done those things, but the $8 million to me includes that. Certainly 7.9 of that's not going to be for right away with them.
Well, I think we also need to be cognizant of, the new development just to the south of that, and will they be accessing that road? I see it teed off there. Are they going to be looking for additional access on and off of Santa Fe too?
Yes.
Yeah.
Basically right now there's one access point that's existing down towards the vet clinic.
Right.
And so, and that's we've been in this discussion for more than a year, and that's a particular pinch point as well. And they've been at the table for that discussion too. So, there's certainly, one of the other things too is, that, we can talk with them about where that road comes out into Santa Fe, because we, and the city and CDOT have some preferences that are different than Evergreen's preferences. But now that the south parcel's under contract, that provides some additional opportunities where that might come out that might be beneficial for all of us.
Sure. Well, I'm behind Kyle on this, and what Mark had said earlier, so I'm in favor of going for the more expensive option, the $12 million option. As long as we're at this, let's go for the 9.
Sure, why not?
Do we have any other questions? Karina.
Question, I want to have a clarification. The intent is if we go forward with the $19 million project, at least to
19.
11 plus 8?
The 2 quad roads.
Would it be both of them or one or the other?
The quadrant is 19 million.
I mean, you can do, realistically, the biggest relief comes from both.
Okay.
Are you saying that the price of the quadrant is 19 million?
You can do one without doing the other.
But what do you want to do? What you're proposing?
If I got 19 million, I'd be happy to build both of them. So that would be our goal.
Both is 19.
Yeah, that would certainly be our goal.
So I want to be clear of the direction that we're given here. So the direction would be to propose the quadrant at 19 million with the ability to still ratchet back to CFI if we so choose.
Yep. Yes. As a side note, one thing that we haven't talked about, which will come up, is let's round it up to 20. A $20 million intersection is going to require a minimum of a $4 million local match.
And we will be talking to council about that at the retreat Friday and Saturday.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
Come on, the general checkbooks.
We'll be passing the hat. We'll be fine.
All right, we have anything else, sir? That's good stuff.
Thanks for your feedback. And I just want to say, by the way, from the staff, sorry.
Jeez.
Go ahead.
Mine's an after comment.
Okay. I want to say from a staff perspective, from the Public Works Director standpoint, we got to this point with a great deal of work from our technical staff. They aren't sitting up here, they're sitting here and elsewhere in HDR, and we wouldn't be at this point without a lot of great work by our engineering staff to get us to this point. Our relationship with our partners, CDOT, RTD, Arapahoe County, Douglas County. So to us, that's been an important point to get to right here today, and I just want to acknowledge that.
Mark, you have something?
Gold star.
You haven't told us your preference. I can tell by your drawings you're leaning in one direction, I think. But tell me what you think is the best solution between continuous flow and the quadrant intersection.
At the end of the day, they both give equal benefit for the interim solution traffic-wise, which is the highest priority.
But add the big picture in for the intrusion into RTD or the Enzer property, add that into the equation. What would be your preference?
I don't have one. And I know that's you're going back to, but I really don't. To me, technically speaking, these are two great solutions. Great in the context of what you can do there in the interim. One is a little bit more technical than the other. The CFI impacts the associated properties quite a bit less than, say, the quad road does. But there's also benefits for each of those. So it's, a fun discussion.
Did you say that you thought the quad roads would position us better for the final solution?
What it does is you've already got, when they go to build the final solution, you're going to have to divert traffic somehow and keep traffic flowing.
Oh, so it sets us up for that.
Yeah, it's kind of like a ramp road you'd have anyway around an intersection when you're doing construction. So.
All right, Karina, ready for a final?
One of the things I'd like us to circle back to is the mineral station framework and see how that is informing helping us to help inform which way we go with this. And then the second piece is in the long-term solution. Here we just talk about long-term as it relates to, you know, expansion of the roadway. But when we look at long-term, when we're trying to address traffic, et cetera, we have to look at other transportation options. We have the light rail there. We have to bring back to the table the extension of the light rail and really make a decision as a city of whether this area is going to be a transportation hub and the end of the line, or if we're going to try to push our city to push the light rail to an end of the hub somewhere else. So I think before we get to that long-term solution, we have to take a position and then determine to what degree we can influence.
That's, to me, the exact reason why we're going through the PEL.
That's what they'll do.
That's what the PEL is for, is to bring all that to the table to talk about where we're going.
Great. Great. That was the closing comment. Good job.
Well, like we don't have 2 days to leave the audience there.
Good job. All right, Keith.
Thanks, that's it.
Thanks, Keith.
Thank you.
All right. We are moving on to,
Just city manager comments, if we're to that point of the agenda.
We are.
I did send council an email here this afternoon where there is an opportunity if you want to comment on the process here for historic designation of our post office. And you're not obligated to do that, but if you are, I would suggest that you perhaps send the comments to me, and then we can work with the planning staff to aggregate that and send it off into the process. You also notice in that email that the Historic Preservation Board is going to put that on their agenda, is my understanding, for them to consider that designation.
So is this a yes, no, or are we maybe discussing in the future?
This is the opportunity for you to add comments in whatever form or nature you feel is appropriate, whether you support it or not, and if so, under what conditions. So it's not necessarily a decision about yes or no, it's about your feelings as a council member on that level of support. Well, let's see, what time is it here? I'm looking to...
The day is young. We have another hour and 20 minutes.
Mike Sutherland, maybe you can provide guidance there. Because I know the deadline, we're looking at maybe trying to get that extended, is my understanding as well.
Well, so I can talk with Andrea about that, but I believe the initial deadline for comments is early February, I believe the 11th. And we'd like to get comments sort of accumulate, or get them Aggregated, thank you. Maybe a week earlier than that. So it's a fairly short time frame.
End of next week would be appreciated, I think.
That'd be terrific.
So are you looking for individual comments, or
Correct.
do you want a council collective resolution?
Just individual comments.
So there's no reason to have some kind of discussion and maybe even float this to citizens?
That's not how the process works, council member, to be honest. That's not how it's set up. So this is actual individual comments by each council member. So it's the process that's started. So now it's your opportunity to comment on it.
And the citizens can comment too.
Yeah, there's an opportunity for that.
Yeah, but there's just not a formal.
An opportunity for that, yes.
Okay, is that it? That's all I have.
I have nothing.
Whoa. I hope we got that on video.
And I was only just 25 minutes, I'm like Papa Quickster.
Hey, I told you 9:30, all right? I beat that time.
I'll be here early.
All right, and if we have nothing else, anybody else have anything? If not, we are adjourned.
That was awesome.